I haven't been this confused about how I feel about a novel in quite a long time. And that's because part of me really enjoyed reading this. I did want to get back to the book whenever I'd stopped reading it. It only took me, I believe, 3 days, 3 nights. So it was enough to keep me engaged, and I did want to know what happened. But there were bits of it that I thought were not very well done, for specific reasons, not just a general feeling. I will talk about those in a moment. And also the title. The title is really not good, and I will again explain that. So just now I'll briefly explain what it's about, non-spoilers, but then I am going to have to go into a little bit of detail. But when I discuss the ending or things that happen that are key plot points, I will kind of try and talk vaguely. So if you've read it, you'll know what I mean. If you haven't, hopefully you can follow what I'm saying. Basically, Her Missing Daughter by D.S. Butler centres around protagonist Abby, who is currently away working, but she comes back to the UK after her friend Nicole is murdered. And she comes back and finds out that Nicole's daughter, her 15-year-old daughter, has actually gone missing. And that's where the title comes in, of course. And then she tries to find the daughter, and then other things start to go wrong. Pretty standard setup for a psychological thriller. It did feel quite psychological at certain times. I was relatively happy with it for the most part. This is where the spoilers come in. And they're not going to be big spoilers, mainly because the first one I'm about to say may seem like a spoiler, but it happens within the first, maybe the first quarter. It's very quick. Basically, Her Missing Daughter is a really bad title because the daughter is found within the first quarter of the book, give or take. I'm not 100% sure if that's correct, but the daughter actually becomes like quite a prominent protagonist throughout this. Her role in this is really important because certain things start to happen to her, and for example, I've said this is spoilers, so it's fine. She starts to be followed by somebody, and I will say who was following her. I didn't work out that was who it was, so I was quite impressed with the reveal of that. But she becomes quite important in the development of the narrative. So she's only a missing daughter for quite a small fraction of this. So it's really a very misleading title. I did read this because I like stories about mispers, and I thought that this would be one. Absolutely isn't. So really not a great choice. The main chunk of the narrative develops quite well. I didn't have that many issues with most of it from start to finish. I did think Janet as a character was really unnecessarily mean. Janet is Nicole's sister and the daughter's aunt, of course. And she starts to be quite mean, and she says things to Abby like, you need to stop meddling in our family life, etc. And I kind of thought, okay, so maybe something has happened. Maybe somebody has spread a rumour, or there's been some hearsay that Abby is meddling in a certain way, maybe to, move into Nicole's house or claim her daughter as her own. But none of that ever came to light. She was literally just mean for no reason. And while she could be quite mean for no reason, that's fine, that's a character trait of some very horrible people, some of the things she said, there was no fuel for it, there was no reason for her to say certain things. And she could have been a lot more well-developed. There could have been reasons for these things, but there just wasn't. And I feel like it was mean for being mean and for causing a stir, and it just didn't work. Particularly when Janet and Nicole's mother started to be quite cold towards Abby. No reason for that whatsoever. So again, I feel like certain aspects were not either very well developed or very well explained. That is also the same for the ending, and I'll try and explain this as best as I can, but if you really want to read this and you don't want to know what happens, I'd stop listening to me wittering on about this just now. So basically, at the end, something is revealed, and Abby just suddenly twigs. It just suddenly occurs to her that this other character is responsible for this happening, because by chance she meets another girl in a park who just happens to have potentially almost gone through the same thing. At least so we believe. I can't say more than that. But that, first of all, is a massive coincidence. She goes to that person's house, and just by coincidence again, another person is there. And there was no real reason for them to be there. There was no real reason for him to have seen anybody going into that house. And there was no real reason for Abby to all of a sudden suspect anybody of what had happened, or to blame anybody for what had happened to her. And it was like, all of a sudden, just all of the questions that were unanswered fell into place, but there was nothing to trigger them. And there was no real reason for any of this. I also feel like Steve's business partner was not in this enough. He needed more character development. We needed to know more about his home life, or who he was as a person, in order to understand some of his actions, or in order to be further confused by some of his actions, however you want to look at it. So there were actually, from a technical perspective, a lot wrong with this. The grammar isn't great. The writing is quite juvenile. Whenever the characters went into a restaurant or a cafe, we'd find out exactly what they were eating, and it's kind of like written like a list. I had this and she had that, and it's kind of primary school writing in that respect. But vocabulary obviously suggests that this isn't primary school writing. It is articulate in a lot of ways, just not in some others. Would I recommend it? I'd say give it a go. Certainly if you're new to psychological thrillers, it's not going to mess you up too much. It's a pretty easy read, not that shocking, quite frustrating. But again, the bits that were revealed weren't seen coming. So even though I feel like a lot of it is forced and doesn't make a lot of sense, and the characters are just not as well developed as they could be, and the writing isn't amazing, the actual twists that make this a psychological thriller are quite surprising. So it has its benefits. From a technical perspective, it's not great. From a storytelling perspective, it's pretty decent. If you like thrillers, give it a go. Let me know what you think. D.S. Butler does actually have another novel called Lost Child. Assuming that's not a red herring like her missing daughter, I might actually give that one a go. But for now, I'm happy enough to have read this. I don't regret reading it. It certainly had its moments.